And we are live. You already know who it is. My name is Mike Kyle, aka the Fantasy Vulture. I have over a decade worth of fantasy football experience and have continuously competed for fantasy championships over the course of the past 6 seasons. Let's make it 7 in 2020. But enough of me. I'm here for you on today's episode of the FB Show. We're going to continue with our Week 4 game recaps, breaking down every single Week 4 matchups, all through the lens of fantasy football. Up next, the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Washington football team. So if you're excited for this game recap, be sure to hit that like button down below like an open receiver downfield. Also smash that subscribe button like a power running back up the middle so you never miss a video from me. And last but not least, you can follow me on all social media platforms at FFVulture, specifically Twitter though, where I love to interact with you guys over there, answer some start-sit questions, trade offers, and of course, anything really fantasy football related, right? But let's dive right in between the Ravens and Washington. And the Ravens bounced back after their disappointing Monday night performance, defeating Washington by a final score of 31-17, dropping Washington to 1-3, where the Ravens moved to 3-1. Lamar Jackson had a great bounce back game, as we were all anticipating. 14 completions, 21 pass attempts, 193 passing yards, 53 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns, including a 50-yard rushing touchdown. Mark Ingram did pretty well, all things considered. Only had 8 carries, though, 34 yards, and a score. Hollywood Brown did Hollywood Brown things, hauling in 4 of his 8 targets for 86 yards. Mark Andrews returned to form with a great game. 3 targets, 3 receptions for 57 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Moving over to Washington now. Dwayne Haskins, 45 pass attempts, 32 completions for 314 yards, and 1 touchdown. Antonio Gibson is the biggest story of this game. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about him. 13 carries, hauled in 4 of 5 receptions for 128 total yards and 1 touchdown. And Terry McLaurin is going to do Terry McLaurin things as well. 10 receptions, 14 targets for 118 yards. Moving over at the snap counts for Washington's backfield, I should have mentioned this when talking about Gibson. J.D. McKissic actually led this backfield in snaps with 39, Antonio Gibson 31, and then Peyton Barber had a measly 5. So, like normal, let's talk about it, right? I want to start off with the Ravens, and then we'll talk about Washington and Antonio Gibson and all the juiciness that's going on over there, right? I'm disappointed in the Ravens. I really am. First of all, I had them minus 14 and push, nice push action. Disappointed in that. I'm also disappointed because I said they were going to drop 50 and they only dropped 31. Thanks, Baltimore. But then I'm also disappointed mainly because this running back room is still an absolute fucking shit show. Guys, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. Mark Ingram had 8 carries for 34 yards and that touchdown. Gus Edwards had 9 carries for 38 yards. J.K. Dobbins had 5 carries for 16 yards and caught 1 pass for 1 yard. To break it down even further for you, if that's not enough, right? Here is the Ravens' final snap count according to Nathan Janke on Twitter at PFF_Nathan Janke. Gus Edwards 22, J.K. Dobbins 21, Mark Ingram 14. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this backfield. I lied. I do know what to do with this backfield. And that's basically get rid of them, trade them. Don't cut. I wouldn't say cut them, but trade them. At the minute, you can probably cut Dobbins. You're probably not rostering Gus Edwards, but if you are, you can probably cut him. And you're gonna hang on to Mark Ingram for name value, and that's what you're gonna use to try and flip him in a trade. Or even if you have to tack on Mark Ingram in a different trade package in order to try and level it up, like just kind of throw in Mark Ingram as part of a deal, so be it. But this is now 4 straight weeks, where we have had zero clarity in this backfield whatsoever. They're still working on basically splits of 35, 35, 25, and Mark Ingram was the odd man out. This week, and granted, this was a game where Baltimore did get ahead early, so maybe they didn't need to utilize him in that way. But even still, in games previously, he's still only getting 35% of the snaps. They're still rotating guys in and out, and this is just not something that I want to deal with any longer. It's one thing, to deal with the Tampa Bay backfield. It's one thing to deal with the Los Angeles Chargers backfield, where you are just trying to figure out, where you're only deciding between 2 options, right? But very similarly to Detroit, you are now deciding between 3. Kerryon Johnson, Adrian Peterson, and DeAndre Swift. To this parallel being Mark Ingram, Gus Edwards, and J.K. Dobbins. It's not something that I want to take any part in, even though this team wants to run the ball, right? So I think that's the thing that makes it such a gut punch, is the fact that there should be opportunity here for somebody to break through, but they're just sprinkling the carries across 3 different piles here, and in the end, that's not going to prove to be fantasy relevant for any of them, right? So my official take on the Ravens backfield as currently stands is you need to look to sell. I don't know what you get for them because they haven't done anything to warrant a trade, to warrant value in a way. But this is now, we've had 2 good weeks and 2 bad weeks of Mark Ingram, and we've had 1 good week of J.K. Dobbins, and Gus Edwards has done nothing besides eat into their workloads. So again, you're going to sell Mark Ingram off of name value alone, but you need to get off this roller coaster because he's going to hurt you now at this point more than he's going to help you. And that's not a great feeling for a guy who you're probably starting as your running back 2 on most weeks. Let's see. Moving over to the Ravens receiving options here. Hollywood had a good game. He had a good bounce back game, I felt like, right? Getting double-digit fantasy points and half-point formats, but it still wasn't great. Still hasn't found the end zone at all this year. And I don't know what's going on, but I think it's actually fair to say that this Baltimore offense just looks off, right? Outside of Lamar and that 50-yard run, and he had a few great throws to Mark Andrews, but we know that their connection is super special. Something just looks off with the way that the Ravens are playing. It doesn't. I think the big thing here, honestly, is last year, it looked so sharp, it looked so crisp, it looked really smooth. Whereas this year, it just kind of stalls in a way. It stalls in a way that I don't think we were expecting it to, but I also don't think the NFL has figured out the Ravens or anything like that. I kind of feel like this is just a natural regression that we were all expecting from this team. Now, Lamar still played great. He still was able to drop 24 fantasy points for you, which we love to see that. Mark Andrews came through in a big way. But Hollywood just really hasn't broken through in the way that I and a lot of other people were expecting him to. Coming up next week, or the next 2 weeks rather, you have Cincinnati and Philadelphia, so those are actually 2 great matchups there. And then they play Pittsburgh with that rescheduled game. So it gets a little bit tougher there. Then they have their bye week, and then it's Indianapolis and New England and Tennessee, then Pittsburgh again. So it might be rough sledding for Marquise going forward, all things considered. I'm definitely going to move him back down to a flex option instead of a wide receiver 2. Granted, I don't know how many of you were actually starting him in that spot. But in fact, how comfortable are you actually starting Hollywood at your flex now? This is essentially 4 straight weeks where he hasn't done anything super spectacular for you. He's probably hurt you more than he's helped you, all things considered. But I really do think, this is the thing that not a whole lot of people were really accounting for, right? Mark Andrews is still the number 1 target on this team, and this is the team that is going to look to run the ball, and it's a team that is going to that while they say they want to throw the ball more, they really haven't yet, right? So specifically, what does that do to Marquise Brown's ceiling, right? The cap is still there on it. We were expecting the cap to come off, and it hasn't yet. So going forward with Hollywood, I think it's one of those things where you have to play him if you have to. He's a great play if you're going up against your league's juggernaut and you need that swing for the fences play. But other than that, I don't know how much confidence you can have in starting him, just because it's not only the fact that he isn't scoring touchdowns, it's also the fact that the yardage isn't even there, right? If you look at weeks 2 and 3, 42 yards and 13 yards. This week was 86, so obviously that's a big bump. And he had 100 yards receiving the first game too. But there is definitely room for improvement here with Hollywood, all things considered. I'm not going to bench him per se. I'm just going to I'm going to evaluate all of my options before I just willy-nilly throw him into my flex. I think that's the best way to put him at. But let's move over to Washington now. Dwayne Haskins for, I want to say, the 2nd straight week. Let me make sure of this. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, even still, all 4 weeks, honestly. The pass attempts are still there. He's consistently throwing for 35-plus attempts, 31, 33, 37, and 45. 300 yards passing. Unfortunately, had a rushing touchdown, but not a passing touchdown this game, and that's obviously going to limit him in a way. Like, you have to, like, again, this is the story with Washington is this team good enough to score consistently? And how does that impact everybody else involved? So like McLaurin, right? McLaurin is so good, but is the quarterback play enough to get him over the hump, right? McLaurin has 1 touchdown through 4 weeks, but you look at the receiving yards and look at the targets, and everything else is through the roof, right? Everything is great. 61 receiving yards, 125, 83, 118. Targets, 7, 10, 8, 14. The work is there. He just hasn't been able to find his way to get into the end zone, all right? So I think that's going to come eventually. But the big thing here for me, really, is Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissic, and Peyton Barber. This is something that we've talked about a lot on the FV show, and specifically Antonio Gibson. If you guys aren't aware, I am an Antonio Gibson truther. He was one of my number 1 targets in my Dynasty draft this season, so I do have him on my Dynasty team. And this is now 3 straight weeks where Antonio Gibson has had fantasy games of 10-plus fantasy points. In week 2, it was 11.7. In week 3, it was 10.5. And in week 4, this week, it was 20.8. He was carving up this Ravens defense, which is so good, right? This Ravens defense is super solid all the way around, and he was torching them. He is head and shoulders the best running back in this football team, on this football team, in this running back room, is what I meant to say. But the issue is that they don't value him as that pass catcher yet, which doesn't make sense because he played wide receiver in college. We know this. Like, Antonio Gibson is a very good pass catcher. Like, and despite that, like, I say that they don't value him in the pass catching role. He still had 5 targets out of the backfield today. He caught 4 of them for 82 yards. But J.D. McKissic had 8 targets out of the backfield, caught 7 of them for 40 yards. Antonio Gibson is so much better than Peyton Barber and so much better than J.D. McKissic, and for whatever fucking reason, they refuse to fully unleash him. Right? We've talked about his snap counts here before. 26%, 64%, 41%, 44%. And despite those numbers, he is head and shoulders the best player on the field. He is also just producing in a way that is kind of unbelievable for how much work he's getting, on top of the fact of how bad this offense is. Like, he is the thing that is keeping this offense afloat in a way. So Antonio Gibson, like, the breakout is here. It is officially here. 3 straight games of 10-plus fantasy points and a double-digit and a 20-plus performance here today. But it should be so much better than it actually is. But all that being said, all that aside, it's going to be frustrating starting Gibson because of that, just because you know that he should be getting more work than he's actually getting. But Antonio Gibson, I'm finally at a place now where I'm comfortable starting Antonio Gibson on a week-in, week-out basis. This was something that I was really on the fence on earlier to start the season. I've talked about this many, many times about these rookies and just players changing teams. I wanted to see it first for a duration of the early part of the season. And now for 3 straight weeks, Antonio Gibson has proven to be a very good fantasy running back, a guy who is capable of getting the job done, even if he isn't getting the full opportunity that he should. I'm all in on Gibson. I've been all in on Gibson, but now I'm finally at the point where, hey, let's throw him into the lineup now. Let's actually get that production in my lineup instead of on my bench. I'm in on Gibson. Anything else here? Not really. Again, Washington's pretty cut and dry. Like, the only fantasy relevant pieces on them or on this team is Terry McLaurin, Antonio Gibson, and then Logan Thomas, who Thomas again for the third straight week hasn't come through in the way that we want him to. The targets are still there, just what he's doing with them is not. You can probably cut Logan Thomas now at this point officially. He was a nice guy to have. All things considered, when George Kittle was out, because you love the opportunity that he actually presented, but it looks like that opportunity is not going to come to fruition, unfortunately. So I'm out on Logan Thomas now. Bye weeks are approaching, so maybe in the future down the line, if you have to start him, you can, but I wouldn't feel too confident about it, all things considered. Other than that, I honestly think that's going to do this. This game was pretty standard. Like I said, pretty cut and dry. I knew the things we were going to talk about, how much time we get to talk about them, and the big things, honestly, for this game was just the running back room for both teams. I think it's so funny actually too, right? They're both a mess, but at least in one, I know what I'm going to get from a player week in, week out, that being Antonio Gibson, whereas you're spinning the wheel with Baltimore every single week, and you're hoping that it lands on your player. So again, sell your Ravens, hold Antonio Gibson, And maybe, like that's the, I was gonna say you can try and trade for Antonio Gibson, but you probably can't after a game like this. But that's going to do it for my Baltimore Ravens and Washington football team Week 4 game recap. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. Try to do this for every single Week 4 matchup. You can also follow me on all social media platforms at FFVulture. Again, thank you so much for watching. Remember, people come and go, but fantasy championships are forever, and I will see you in the next video.